Hello everyone, welcome to the new session of Sustainable Agriculture Part 1. In this session, we are going to study about Introduction to Sustainable Agriculture. So, we will understand what is sustainable agriculture, okay? Farming and natural resources. So, what are the natural resources that is required for the farming? We are going to discuss about in this particular topic. Issue affecting to the water cycle. So water is one of the major requirement for the farming. So if the water cycle is not running properly, then there will be the effect on farming, right? On agriculture. So that also we are going to study in this session. Water quality and water conservation practices. So in this session, we are going to cover up these important topics. So let us start. So what is sustainable agriculture? Sustainable agriculture refers to the ability of a farm to produce food indefinitely. Food indefinitely means how much food is required, we can grow that amount of food, okay? And keeping in mind that we are not going to cause any severe or irreversible damage to the ecosystem health. Keeping this in mind, we are growing our food. Okay, so the first thing is that we are not going to change the ecosystem. We are not going to damage, and that damage should not be irreversible. Okay, so severe damage to the ecosystem health should be our prime priority. Okay, so the sustainable agriculture refers to the ability of a farm to produce food indefinitely without causing severe or irreversible damage to the ecosystem health. So what are the things that we should keep in mind while we are studying sustainable agriculture? Improved environment health. So there should be concern for the environment health. Okay, minimization of off-site environmental impact. So there should not be a big environmental impacts on the cropland, okay, or around the cropland. So that is minimized. Reduced environmental risk. There should not be any type of environmental risk, right? And optimized resource usage and conservation. So judicial use of the resource, that is very, very important. We should not waste our resource, okay, and even conserve them. High production benefits and low cost production. So there must be high production benefits. The production should be great. And improved food production. So these are the things that we should keep in mind if we are going for the sustainable agriculture. Two key issues in the sustainable agriculture are, what are those? Biophysical. The long-term effect of various practices on the soil properties and the processes essential for the crop productivity. So this is the biophysical, that we should take care of the soil properties. What type of soil is this? Okay, so depending on that, our sustainable agriculture is affected. So if we are going for the sustainable agriculture, then we must check the soil properties, whether the soil is having the important nutrients or not. And if not, then what are the nutrients that we are going to require, right? So this is the biophysical issue. Next is the socio-economic issue. The long-term ability of the farmers to obtain inputs and manage resources such as labor. So this is also a very, very important for the sustainable agriculture, that is socio-economic, means the labor requirement of the labor and how farmers are using them. So this is the two key important issues for if we are going for the sustainable agriculture. The physical aspect of the sustainability are partly understood. practices that can cause long-term damage to soil include excessive tillage leading to the erosion. So if there are no plants or no grasses, then there can be chances of soil erosion. Okay, so the excessive tillage, okay, then there can be a cause of erosion. And irrigation without adequate drainage leading to the accumulation of salt in the soil. So if there is no adequate drainage, then there will be deposition of salt in the soil, as well as there is a loss of water even. Okay, so this is also one of the important aspect. Long-term experiments provide some of the best data on how various practices affect the soil properties essential to the sustainability. So soil is a very, very important. Okay, so there are so many practices that we are following for so many years that is harming to our soil quality. Okay, so that is very essential to understand if we are going for this sustainability agriculture. Although air and sunlight are available everywhere on the earth, crops also depend on the soil nutrients and the availability of water. So these two things are very, very important. Very, very important. What are those? The number one, soil nutrients. Okay, and because the soil is different from place to place, state to state, and according to that our crops also dependent. Okay, so checking the soil nutrient is very, very important. Second thing is the availability of water. If there is no availability of water, then there can be less crop in that particular area, less grown crop. And the other thing like required for the crop growing, that is air and sunlight. So sunlight is available everywhere, right? And air is also available everywhere. So these two things are not in our hand, but the soil nutrient, managing the soil nutrients and management of water, that is a main thing for the sustainable agriculture. When farmers grow and harvest crops, they remove some of these nutrients from the soil. So every time the farmers are growing the crops and harvesting the crops, they are removing some of the nutrients from the soil. Okay, so nutrients are going where? They are going to the crops. So without replenishment, the land would suffer from the nutrient depletion and unusable for the further farming. So there must be the replenishment of the nutrients after every cycle of crop. Okay, so the land otherwise the land will suffer from the nutrient depletion, and in the next cycle of the crop our crop will not grow in proper way and there will be less yield even. So for proper farming, after every cycle we must replenish our crop field with the proper nutrients. Okay, so sustainable agriculture depends on replenishing the soil while minimizing the use of non-renewable resources such as natural gas used in converting atmospheric nitrogen into the synthetic fertilizer or the mineral ore, that is phosphate. So we are not going to use these synthetic fertilizer and phosphate, means chemical fertilizers, right, in sustainable agriculture. So possible sources of nitrogen that would in principle, but we require nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus in the field, right? So what can we do? So the possible source of nitrogen that would in the principle be available indefinitely include recycling crop waste and livestock or the human manure. So we can recycle the crop waste, the livestock manure that we can put in the crop field. Okay, so the growing legume crops and forage such as the peanuts or the alfalfa that form the symbiosis with the nitrogen fixing bacteria called rhizobia. So these Leguminous plant we can grow, mixed cropping we can do, we can go for the alternate cropping. Means suppose we are having a cereals in one season, then in another season we can grow in this particular field leguminous plant. So this leguminous plant will fix the atmospheric nitrogen, okay, and it will replenish the nitrogen in the field. So no need of using the chemical based fertilizer. We can use the manure made from the livestock or the crop waste, or we can grow leguminous crop either with the mixed cropping, like if we see the wheat and mustard crops are grown together. Okay, so these things we can do to avoid chemical fertilizer and go for the sustainable agriculture. This is one of the example of the sustainable agriculture. Industrial production of nitrogen by the Haber process uses hydrogen, which is currently derived from the natural gas. But this hydrogen could instead be made by the electrolysis of water using electricity, perhaps from the solar cells or the windmill. So we can use these by solar cells and windmills. Genetically engineered non-legume crop to form nitrogen fixing symbiosis or fix nitrogen without microbial symbionts. So we can go for the microbial symbionts, or we can use genetically engineered non-leguminous crops to form nitrogen fixing symbiosis, right? So there are so many options for the sustainable agriculture. Sustainable agriculture integrates three main goals. Environment, health. Number one, we have to take care of our environment health. Economic profitability means we must have the profit from our crop growing. And socio-economic equity. So these are the three things that sustainable agriculture integrates. These are the three main goals. Variety of philosophies, policies and practices have contributed to these goals. So there are many types of philosophies, policies and practices that has given strength to the sustainable agriculture. Okay, so let us discuss the second topic, that is the farming and natural resource. So till here we understand what is sustainable agriculture, right? Okay, so let us go for the next topic, farming and natural resources. The number one is water. We discussed in the previous slide that water and soil are the prime importance for the sustainable agriculture. So when the production of food and fiber degrades, the natural resource base, the ability of the future generation to produce and flourish decreases. Okay, so water is a very, very important. So when the production of food and fiber degrades, okay, the natural resource base, the ability of future generation to produce and flourish decreases. So food and fiber is very, very important. And water is the principal resource that has helped agriculture and society to prosper, and it has been major limiting factor when mismanaged. So requirement of the food, requirement of the fiber is very important for today's generation and the future generation, right? And for growing to these food and fiber, we require a very important resource, that is water. Water supply and use. An extensive water storage and transfer system has been established, which has allowed crop production to expand to a very arid region. Okay, so crop production has been expanded to the most fertile land, and also the land which are having a lot of water, right? But there are some land that are arid in regions. So that region are also used for the crop production. We are expanding to that area also. So in drought years, limited surface water supplies have promoted overdraft of the groundwater and consequent is intrusion of salt water or the permanent collapse of the aquifers. So what happened? But there are always drought. So surface water is very limited, and that is why there is a drought. Okay, groundwater also goes down, so not available, and the consequent intrusion of the salt water. So when there is less amount of water, the concentration of salt increases. So salt water is available, that is not good for drinking, for human, for animals, and it is also not good for the growing crops. So that is of no use. Permanent collapse of aquifers, and in these drought years, what happened? The aquifers that also get collapsed. So where to get water for our growing crop? So several steps should be taken to develop drought resistant farming system even in the normal years, including both policy and management action. So what are those? Improving water conservation and the storage measures. We must store water when the lots of water is there, lots of rain is there, flood is there. So that particular water must be stored. That should not be get wasted. And we must conserve our water. Do not waste water. So the first thing. Second, providing incentives for selection of the drought tolerant crop species. We must opt if we know that this particular area are frequent getting drought, right? So then we can go for the drought tolerant crop species. There are so many genetically engineered crop that has been developed by breeding or by the genetic engineering. So that particular crop can be grown in these drought areas, drought prevalent areas. Okay, using reduced volume irrigation system. Okay, reduced volume irrigation system means water should conserve. So either we can go for the sprinkler or drop irrigation system, right? So there are so many things that we can do for saving our water and not wasting them, conserving water. Managing crops to reduce water loss. We can manage our crops to reduce water loss, or not planting at all. If that no water is there, do not plant actually in that area, because for planting also you will have some water, you will manage some water, and after that growing after some months the crop, no water there is available, then crop may die. So there is a lot of resource wastage. So in that particular time we must not plant actually, but we can manage our crop from the reduction of water loss. Water quality. Next topic is the water quality. The most important issue related to the water quality involve salinization and contamination of ground and surface water by pesticides, nitrates and selenium. So these are some of the salt that causes salinization of the soil, okay, and contaminate the ground. And in this particular condition, the crop cannot be grown. So salinity has become a problem wherever water of even relative low salt content is used on shallow soil in the arid region and where the water table is near the root zone of the crop. So we should take care of these things, that we should maintain the water quality. Tile drainage can remove the water and salt, but the disposal of the salt and other contaminants may negatively affect the environment depending upon where they are deposited. So tile drainage system can be used and that can remove the salt. Temporary solutions include the use of salt-tolerant crops. We can go, if the salt is there in the soil, then we can grow some salt-tolerant crop. Okay, but this is the temporary solutions. Low volume irrigation and the various management techniques to minimize the effect of salt on crops can also followed. In the long term, some farmland may need to be removed from production or converted into other use if the salt is there. Okay, so for some time we can use that farmland for some other purposes, not for the production of crop. The other use includes conversion of raw crop land to the production of drought tolerant forage, the restoration of the wildlife habitat, or the use of agroforestry to minimize the impact of salinity and high water tables. So what we can do, we can go for drought tolerant forage growing in that particular area, or we can restore our wildlife habitat. We can go for the agroforestry to minimize the impact of salinity even. So there are so many options that we can for the longer, but it will take time to remove the salinity from the soil. Okay. Pesticides and nitrate, this is so harmful for the water quality. Pesticides and nitrate contaminate the water that can reduce using many of the practices. So we should not go for the chemical fertilizer. By avoiding the chemical fertilizer and the pesticides, herbicide use, we can minimize the water quality contamination. Water contamination actually. Issue affecting the water cycle. So there are so many issues that affect our water cycle, because this is very important, because this water cycle actually bringing water to the land surface, to the earth. So the climate and the land management are responsible to a great extent in the cyclical circulation of water through evaporation, transpiration, and precipitation. The water cycle is a net effect zero and thus finite. So if there is an water cycle is not circulating properly, okay, its evaporation is affected or the transpiration is affected, then there will be no transpiration or less transpiration, right? So there must be proper land management and climate management so that this water cycle should run properly in the environment. Scarcity of fresh water, with 97% of the earth's water is ocean, that is having salt water, and the fresh water accounts for only about 3% of the water available for the agriculture and other needs. And of that, this 3%, this include the glaciers, the icebergs even. The fresh water is the lifeline for the forest and the cropland. So we are having so less fresh water. So there is no chance to waste these fresh water. The erratic rainfall, India has traditionally depended on the rainfall for its agriculture needs. So we are totally dependent on what? Rainfall for our agriculture. Nutrient deficiency and indiscriminate fertilizer application. So this is another point that is affecting the water cycle. There is nutrient deficiency and indiscriminate fertilizer application. Degradation of soil affects the ability of crop to effectively utilize water in the agriculture. So if the quality of the soil get affected, then the crop will not utilize the water. The crop will not utilize the water from the soil in a proper way. Water conservation. These practices have been neglected in India, and we are now facing the consequences of this fully. So water conservation is must, not only in India, even this is one of the challenge that whole world is facing, right? So we as a citizen of India must take care of our water resource, and we are responsible for its conservation. Water quality. Some methods and the initiatives that can help in water sustainability for the agriculture. So there are some methods and initiatives that can help in water sustainability for the agriculture. So what are those methods? Adoption of best irrigation practices. We must go for the best irrigation practices. With the dwindling supply for irrigation, proper technological and the resource and the application management are needed for the efficient use of water. So according to the water resource availability, we must go for our irrigation, type of irrigation that should be changed according to the water availability. Okay, so resource and application management are needed for the efficient use of water. So how to save our resource, how to use our resource judicially, this thing very important. And also the application of the management. We must follow some management practices for using water judicially. So if we are using these two things, then we can adopt for best irrigation practices. Sustainable water management in the agriculture can be achieved by reduction in water loss. Use water for the agriculture, but there should not be water loss. Use of efficient irrigation system. So according to the water availability, we must opt for the irrigation system. So if we are planning for agriculture in the arid region where the water availability is very less, then we can go for the sprinkler method or drop by drop irrigation method. So there are so many methods then that we can save our water. Better efficiency in increased water use, adoption of innovative irrigation methods, and efficiency in the fertilizer application. Reuse marginal waters, that is saline water, wastewater, and runoff water. This we can use for the agriculture benefits. Okay. Improve agriculture practices. Improper soil management, indiscriminate fertilizer application, and overuse of agrochemicals are connected with sustainable water management and contribute to the deteriorating groundwater. Very, very important. If we are not properly following the soil management, number one, if we are using this fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, right? Not in a proper way, and the overuse of agrochemicals, okay, then we are not following the sustainable water management. Our water quality is going to degrade anyhow, and that can also deteriorate the groundwater. So some efforts in these areas will go a long way in achieving the sustainable water management for the agriculture. So let us see what are those. Tilling practices. Soil surface tillage, contour tillage, conservation tillage results in reduced erosion. So if we are living at the height, then we can go for the contour tillage. Soil surface tillage, it should be covered. Soil surface should always be covered with the plants, so it can minimize the erosion, right? And improve the hydration of soil and maintains the organic component in the soil. So there are so many benefits of the tilling practices. Mulching and increase of organic matter in the soil. Advantages includes conservation of soil moisture, improved soil fertility, and reduction in the weed growth. So mulching is also very, very important and increase the organic matter in the soil. How? These advantages include the conservation of soil moisture. So there is a lot of moisture, improved soil fertility. If mulching is done, then it can improve the soil fertility and reduction in weed growth also that compete with the crop. Maintenance of soil acidity. Soil pH is referred to as the master variable. So very important for the question. For soil, and it has effect in decreasing availability of the plant nutrient, increasing certain elements to the toxicity level, and degrading the ecosystem of good bacteria, earthworms, and other organisms. So these organisms are so important for increasing the fertility of the soil. But if the pH is high, okay, toxic elements are there, then all the good bacteria will die, all the earthworms will die, and the fertility of the soil decreases, and there will be less production of crop in that particular soil. Proper maintenance of pH could improve the crop development through intensive and deep rooting and lead to the higher soil availability. Hence, soil acidity remediation needs to be looked at the local level in detail through outreach and education. So there must be education to the farmers. We must reach agriculture people must reach to these farmers and educate them about the soil acidity and how to get rid of them. What are the practices that should be stopped immediately, and what are the new practices that they should adopt to minimize the soil pH or maintain the suitable pH for the crop growth. Water conservation practices, very, very important topic. In situ and off-site. The water is available in situ as well as off-site. So we must conserve water in both the form. With a majority of the Indian farming still dependent on the rain gods, it becomes important to conserve and harness this important through erratic resources. Okay, that is the important resources. So we are totally dependent on the rain gods, means on the rain for our agriculture. So we must know what is the importance of water for our agriculture. So agricultural use of water can be conserved on farms through land farm management, direct seeding of water, intensive crop, encouragement of fallow management, etc. So we can go for so many water management system. Okay, so in the farmland even we can follow the landform management, direct seeding of water intensive crops. So there are so many ways so that we can conserve our water. On-site conservation of water for agriculture can be through water harvesting, recharge of aquifers and storage. Do not waste the rainwater. We must recharge our aquifers. We must plan in that way or manage in that way that all the runoff should go for the aquifers and water should get stored. And when there is no rain, so that water can be used. So there must be water harvesting. Water harvesting and small water storage interventions have a major role to play in the improvement of water availability, especially in the area that depends on the rain-fed crops. So the area that depends on the rain-fed crops, anyhow, they must go for water harvesting. Policy, intervention and integration. The complex and the diverse nature of the water resource management in Indian agriculture means that there should be flexibility in water policy according to the situations and regions. So more flexibility is required with water property rights, and robust framework is needed for sharing the water amongst the states and supporting infrastructure. So we have a right on the water availability, right? We have a right, but at the same time, it's our prime responsibility to conserve and use water judicially. Okay, so there must, in the coming days, some policy must come in this way that you are not going to waste any single drop of water. Similarly, a clear policy framework is needed for levying charges on the use of water resources and electricity, particularly the groundwater. So the groundwater, we are paying for the electricity and the water resources, right? But for the groundwater, if you are using the groundwater, then also there must be some charges. So when water stress is an issue, it becomes all the more important for the farming community to understand why water cannot necessarily be free resource in the long run. So this water is not free resource. And however, this is a continuous and the politicized issue. Wildlife. So after water, there are so many other natural resources. So we will discuss these in detail, but here we have just discussed about the water in the detail, but we are going to see what are the other natural resources. So after water, the second is wildlife. Another way in which the agriculture affect water resources is through the destruction of the riparian habitats with watersheds. The conservation of wild habitat to the agriculture land reduces fish and wildlife through erosion and sedimentation. The effects of pesticides, removal of riparian plants, and the diversion of water. So conservation of wild habitat is very, very important to agriculture land, reduces the fish and wildlife through the erosion, because these wildlife habitat helps to maintain the water in the soil in anyhow, right? So if we remove the wildlife, then our water is going to be affected. So the conservation of wildlife is also important in the same way. The plant diversity in and around both the riparian and the agriculture areas should be maintained in order to support the diversity of wildlife. So if the riparian areas, okay, or the agriculture areas, there are so many plant diversities that grow around the water lake, okay, and around the agriculture areas also. If you remove that, thinking that these plants are of no use, but they are supporting to so many diversity of the wildlife, so they are also important. This diversity will enhance the natural ecosystem and could aid in agriculture pest management. Very important. So if we maintain this diversity, they will enhance our natural ecosystem. They will help to maintain our natural ecosystem. Okay. And they are going to help in pest management, that these pests are harming to our agriculture. So they are used for the pest management. Energy. Moderate agriculture is heavily dependent on non-renewable energy source, especially petroleum, right? So the continued use of these energy sources cannot be sustained indefinitely, yet to abruptly abandon our reliance on them would be economically catastrophic. So energy is also very important. However, a sudden cut off energy supply would be equally disruptive. In sustainable agriculture system, there is a reduced reliance on the non-renewable energy sources and sustainable of renewable sources. So if we are going for the sustainable agriculture, then our main emphasis on renewable energy, use of renewable energy resources, and minimize use of non-renewable energy resources. Okay. Air. Many agriculture activities affect the air qualities. These include smoke from the agriculture burning. This is a major problem nowadays we are facing. Dust from tillage, traffic and harvest, pesticide drift from the spraying, and the nitrous oxide emission from the use of nitrogen fertilizers. So there are some agriculture activities that are affecting to air quality badly. So in sustainable agriculture, we must keep these in mind. So we should first of all stop this burning of agriculture waste. Options to improve the air quality include incorporating crop residue into the soil, using appropriate level of tillage, and the planting windbreaks, cover crops, or the strips of native perennial grasses to reduce dust. So there are so many options that we can cover crops or this go for the strips of native perennial grass growing to reduce the dust. Okay, we should also go for using the appropriate level of tillage and reduce and this crop waste. Okay, that residues should be dumped in the soil, and that can go for turn into manure even. Soil erosion continues to be the serious threat to our continued ability to produce adequate food. Numerous practices have been developed to keep soil in place, which include reducing or eliminating tillage, managing irrigation to reduce the runoff, and keeping the soil covered with the plants or mulch. So reduction of eliminating the tillage, managing irrigation to reduce the runoff. If we manage our irrigation practice in a proper way, then we can reduce the runoff and we can save water. Keeping the soil covered with the plant or mulch. We should not keep our soil open. So if we follow these things, then we can conserve our soil. Enhancement of the soil quality is discussed in the next section. So we will have one separate session for the soil, as we have discussed mainly water and its conservation and use in the sustainable agriculture in this session. Thank you very much.